For an average person, someone just here working their job, living their life, going to work, being a parent, what are some manifestations that might clue them into the fact that they actually have possibly a gut health problem?
That it's a tertiary to our health rather than synergistic to our health. It's core to our health. The gut microbiome is essential to our physiology and our mental health.
If you are a busy professional, a parent, or someone that is carrying a high performance lifestyle and you are feeling exhausted, you're feeling foggy or bloated or stressed out, even though you feel like you are probably doing everything right, then this episode is for you because we are going to unpack something very new related to all of those conditions. Today, we're breaking down gut inflammation and how it can create digestive imbalance and microbiome disruption, and how it can silently drain your energy and sabotage your mental focus and lower your stress tolerance. And we're going to talk about what you can do to reverse it with simple daily habits. Because if you don't understand this connection, you will keep pushing harder, you will keep sleeping worse, and you will burn out faster. You'll do so without ever having even known there was a root cause fix. So we're going to unpack this today with Gabe Doe. He's the co-founder of Good Brew, and he is someone who has turned his own battle with reflux and chronic fatigue into a mission to make gut healing simple and accessible to everyone.
You can think of the microbiome as another organ, and if it's not in balance and it's in dysbiosis, well, we're going to be sick. Call it the second brain. Why would we also have almost a comparative number of neurons in our gut just for digestion? Obviously, they're doing something much more than just helping us with digestion. 90% of the serotonin in our bodies is produced in the gut. Serotonin is related to cellular metabolism and aging. They disrupted the microbiome of the mice. These mice would have a depressed state and they wouldn't try to escape from a water maze. So they would sit there and drown unless they were saved. About 70% of the gut-brain axis is signals going from the gut to the brain, and 30% from the brain to the gut. When you really understand how important the microbiome is to our overall health, it will blow your mind that our medical system is not putting more focus on that.
Welcome to the Superhuman Blueprint Podcast.
Your story stood out to me immediately when I saw it. You dealt with severe reflux and gut issues for a long time. And when you finally fixed the root cause, you had this sort of cascade of positive benefits that came from that beyond just not having the actual issues that you could tie specifically to your gut. And so I really want to talk about that and dig in on the gut brain connection and ways that simple, practical tips for people that can incorporate this stuff into their lives and or just into their knowledge base, right? So that they understand what's going on with their whole body when they're having a gut situation.
I would say, Drew, that comes back to the gut, and we can go all the way back to ancient times and go back to Hippocrates. They all knew this. And if you can imagine living in a time before modern medicine, people were always looking for the most natural way to heal their health problems. I mean, people 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, they had health issues and they understood their bodies, and the gut has always been an important part of health. But with modern medicine, we really disrupted that whole process and how well we know our bodies and how well we know what affects our health. And in addition to just sort of, taking the modern medical approach, going to the doctor and getting prescribed some medication that may just mask the symptoms or whatnot. In addition to that, our medical process has also done a lot of damage to our bodies with the side effects. And so for every generation since antibiotics have been prevalent, basically since World War II. So antibiotics did a great service to humanity during World War II, but like any technology, we really abused it. And so every generation since antibiotics have been in widespread use, the gut microbiome has become less and less diverse in the Western world. And they'll still study the microbiomes of tribal people and indigenous people in regions of the world whose gut microbiomes haven't been disrupted, and they just see a much healthier and much more diverse microbiome. But in addition to the antibiotics, other medications really affect the gut. Certain antidepressants really affect the gut. But then we have all the preservatives in our processed foods. We have all the pesticides. We have all the toxins. So our gut microbiome is just under constant attack by our modern world. And when you really understand how important the microbiome is to our overall health, it will blow your mind that our medical system is not putting more focus on that. And it is shifting, but it's critical. Like when we talk about the gut microbiome, and when you really realize how big of an impact it has on your health, your mental health, your organ and system in the body, and the fact that our body has giving over the job to many of these very important functions to the microbiome itself. In other words, there are functions that are essential for us to live, not just to be healthy, that our microbiome has the responsibility for doing. So you can think of the microbiome as being sort of another organ, like a symbiotic relationship. And if it's not in balance and it's in dysbiosis, well, we're going to be sick. You can kind of think of it as like having a sick microbiome. You're going to be a sick human. So it's like it's like another organ in the body. But then you have the gut itself, and the gut itself is like the second brain. There's no explanation that's just digestive system alone for why we have so many nerves and neurons in the gut. It can't be just because it's for digestion, because the nerve cells use a huge amount of energy. That's why we have big brains, but we wouldn't have big brains if they didn't give us some sort of advantage. And so why would we also have almost a comparative number of neurons in our gut just for digestion? Obviously, they're doing something much more than just helping us with digestion. They call it the second brain. And so when you talk about exercise and sleep and diet, the gut microbiome should be right in that list, just a higher priority as those other things for maintaining optimal health, as well as, in this day and age, also relieving certain digestive issues. So there's like two groups of people. There's people who are looking to relieve some sort of specific digestive health issue that they're experiencing, and people who are trying to optimize their health with their gut. And of course, there's a huge overlap between those as well.
And can we break it down a little bit more? Can you kind of help us define exactly what is a microbiome? Like, what is a gut microbiome?
Right. So we have a microbiome is also outside of the gut. We have a microbiome on our skin. We have a microbiome on every place of our body. And you can even think of the microbiome outside of the body. But the gut microbiome gets this huge amount of attention because it has such an important function in the body. So you have bacteria. We have in our gut. We have more DNA in our bodies that are microbial DNA than we do of our own DNA. And everybody's gut microbiome is as unique to them as your thumbprint is. And it's very, very important. So the microbes, bacteria, but also fungi, and maybe a few other things too. But those microbiome is the fungi and the bacteria that are living in our gut. And you can't have no microbiome. So you can either have a good microbiome or you can have a bad microbiome, and it will really benefit you to have a good microbiome.
Got it. Awesome. Hey folks, quick interruption. Just give me 30 seconds of your time. I'm here to ask, if you find this show valuable, if you find the information that we share helpful, please subscribe to the show. This helps the show to reach more people. You can subscribe on whatever platform it is which you use to view our show. We thank you very much. This helps us to reach the masses, where we can take all of our great information from our guests and share it with even more people and create a healthier and happier world. Thank you. Back to the show. So what are some of the things that people overlook? Like, what signs are people missing when they are actually having gut issues and they're really not tying it back to gut issues?
Well, inflammation would be, in a general term, a big one. So a lot of inflammatory disease is a broad subject, right? It ties back to the gut. It largely ties back to the gut. And now they're really tying dementia and other cognitive health issues back to the gut, which can also be seen as inflammation in the brain. So let's take, for example, amyloid plaques. They see amyloid plaques as being a part of the immune function, and it's sort of like the last line of defense. And if you may have heard that, like, people who have certain viruses are more prone to Alzheimer's disease, but what they're really seeing a large connection with the gut microbiome is oral bacteria that translocate bad, like gingivitis causing bacteria and cavity causing bacteria, say translocating from the mouth, which obviously is part of the digestive system, but down further into the intestines, where they produce toxins that get outside of the gut and then get into the nervous system. And then those amyloid plaques are attacking those toxins, but also even the bacteria themselves are finding in the brain. Another situation with inflammation would be say with leaky gut. So we have these tight connections in the cells, in the epithelial cells that line the gut and the digestive tract. And these are very, very important barriers because they let nutrients in and out in addition to some other things. So we can call it the mucosal lining. But this lining is maintained by the microbiome. And a healthy microbiome means maintaining a healthy gut lining. And what happens with leaky gut is sometimes we have like temporary leaky gut, and there's openings between these cells allow toxins out of the digestive system or undigested proteins out of the digestive system, or they allow toxins into the digestive system. And this creates a cascade of immune responses that then result in inflammation. In fact, one of the things that really got me interested in the gut microbiome was years ago when I was a grad student. I was working in the Office of Tech Transfer at the university, and we were talking about multiple sclerosis. And so there was a theory, now it's a fairly widely accepted theory, but at the time it was a little bit of a fringe theory that MS and other diseases of that nature were tied back to the gut. And so that really is what planted the seed in my mind for wanting to do more and be interested in the gut microbiome. So inflammatory disease is a big one, but inflammation also then leads to lower energy levels and many other things that just you would feel as as an unhealthy person. Also serotonin. So 90% is related to cellular functions, 90%. And serotonin is a very critical neurotransmitter. People think about it as being the feel-good neurotransmitter, which it certainly is, but this neurotransmitter serotonin does a lot more than just affect our mood, although that's critical. It also affects the motility in the gut, and it giving signals for appetite and also for moving things through the digestive system. But another very important thing that you should find very interesting, and I think it's a little bit of an unknown bit of science right now that you would probably just spend a whole day just researching on, at least a day, is that serotonin is related to cellular metabolism and aging. So what happens is, so we also talk about melatonin. So we know about melatonin in the brain and serotonin in the brain, but we also have serotonin produced in the gut. We have melatonin that's in every cell in the body, and that melatonin plays a critical function in mitochondrial health. So that melatonin does a lot to modulate mitochondria. But the precursor to the melatonin is serotonin. So the serotonin gets brought into the cells, converted to melatonin, which then affects the mitochondria. So we all know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, which is the powerhouse of the body. The cells in the gut that produce serotonin function properly. And so healthy gut microbiome means healthy regulation of serotonin in the gut, which then circulates through the body and has a tremendous amount to do with cellular function. But there's another aspect, there's many of these aspects. The microbiome also plays a critical role in both absorbing B vitamins from our nutrient sources. So we know also that B vitamins are critical to cellular function and to our nervous system. So the microbiome plays a critical role in how well we are able to get those B vitamins from the foods that we eat. But even more interestingly is that many of the microbes also produce B vitamins. So the microbes are like little factories in our gut, and they could be producing bad things if we have bad microbes, or they could be producing good things if we have good microbes. And so these little factories are producing all kinds of metabolites. And one of those is B vitamins. In addition to helping to pull the B vitamins from our food sources, they're also producing the B vitamins, which then affects our health and energy, our nervous system, our mental function. So going back to like cognitive health, the Parkinson's disease. So one of the things they've known for years that Parkinson's disease had relationship to gut. They could see in years before somebody shows signs of Parkinson's disease, often they'll have massive digestive health issues. So one of the theories for that is the B vitamins play a role in how our cells can metabolize and use iron. And so they've seen that in people with Parkinson's disease, that their cells are not able to use and handle iron properly. And they're relating that back to the microbiome and back to the B vitamins. But then there's another super interesting thing that the microbiome does and is almost entirely responsible for, and that is producing short-chain fatty acids. So short-chain fatty acids, we get a small amount of that from the foods that we eat. Our body does not produce any short-chain fatty acids itself, and the microbiome is responsible for like 95% of the short-chain fatty acid production. So short-chain fatty acids provide 70% of the proper fuel source for the cells in the digestive system and the colon. But then those short-chain fatty acids also circulate through the body and provide essential nutrient source for the cells throughout the body. And if we do not have those short chain fatty acids, the cells start looking and scavenging for other nutrient sources, which are inferior, which then causes further cellular dysfunction. And that, so these short chain fatty acids, I think, along with that the topic of the serotonin is something that you would want to spend a large amount of time on. In fact, I was just mentioning to you before we got on here, I met a runner, competitive athlete on a trail yesterday here in Colorado. He's an older gentleman, but he was in great shape. I mean, he was going up and down this trail at 7,000 feet.
Amazing.
And we were talking about short chain fatty acids and that sort of thing, and talking about how sometimes that will be the limiting factor for a lot of athletes. They may perform well, and especially endurance athletes may perform well in 1 year, and then a lot of times they'll relate their lack of performance in another year to their gut getting off. Because when you're putting your body under that much stress, even if you're eating healthy and whatnot, you can disrupt your gut. And then a lot of people, that's one of the struggles that a lot of endurance athletes and extreme athletes have, is maintaining good gut health, because they're putting their body under so much stress. And the short chain fatty acids are very, very important. And I think there's something else in the reading that I do. So they'll talk about when people are under stress, they can end up disrupting their gut. And of course, when their gut's disrupted, that can cause stress. So it's sort of a reciprocal relationship. But there's one really, I guess you would call it a theory, explanation for what's happening there, is that our brain and our gut both need a lot of energy. We have all these neurons in our gut, and we have our brain's consuming all this energy. So when we get under a lot of stress, there's this theory that the gut shuts down in order to give more energy to the brain and let the brain consume more of the available energy in the body.
And when you say the gut shuts down, what does that mean? How does the gut shut down?
In this scenario, it stops from digesting food properly, and it starts, you either get highly constipated or you start to eliminate your nutrients before it's fully digested. So the gut's not consuming as much energy, but then that's also disrupting gut microbiome in that process, and it's also disrupting the production of these neurotransmitters and these sorts of things. So it's not meant to be something that we would experience over a chronically long period of time. This would be something that in the wild would be when we're under immediate attack or danger, right? And it's like when some people have a fear of speaking on stage or something along those lines. A lot of times they'll have digestive health issues, and this is short term. But when people get under these modern scenarios of chronic stress, so they're in a bad marriage or under stress trying to start a business or whatever might be causing your stress. One thing could cause stress to one person, it's not stress to another person. I mean, it's everybody's got their different thing. But when you're chronically like that over a long period, this condition continues, and that really disrupt, and it's really hard to then correct it. It takes a lot of effort to start correcting that process. But in that theory, one of the things I think about is, so these short chain fatty acids are produced by the microbiome and the good bugs, a healthy microbiome that's in homeostasis is feeding on fiber to produce these short chain fatty acids. And when I read that, one of the things I think about is that people who end up in this chronic cycle, they may have started off with a deficiency in short chain fatty acids to begin with. In other words, their microbiome was off from the start. And therefore, when the brain starts needing more energy, there's already a limited amount of fuel in the tank to begin with. So that means you're going to fall into, this is just after my synthesis of all this reading, is that you're going to be much faster to fall into this chronic stress condition if you're already starting with a low tank. So if your microbiome is healthy to begin with, and you're producing a good amount of short chain fatty acids, and you're getting these B vitamins, et cetera, for the start, there's going to be less situations where your body's going to need to offload energy from the gut to the brain to start with. So you're going to be starting with a higher ceiling, or whatever you want to put it, or your floor is going to be higher, your baseline is going to be higher. If you're already dysbiosis, you're going to much more quickly fall into these chronic stress conditions. And here's another really interesting thing to add to that. So I was talking to a Vietnam vet. He's a retired dentist, and he reads up on all this stuff. And I was chatting with him, and he said, hey, this is really interesting because they're starting to do these studies on Vietnam vets. And then when I looked into it, also Gulf War vets, et cetera. And they're saying, people with PTSD may have, not only does changing the gut microbiome help people with anxiety and help people with PTSD who currently have it, but what's even really interesting is that they think that a dysbiosis in the gut at the time that you experience trauma makes you more susceptible to developing PTSD. And so if your gut microbiome is off to begin with, you're not going to be able to process trauma and stress properly, and therefore more prone to developing long-term cognitive disorders as a result of that. And so in the case of Vietnam, they're looking at like, well, did Agent Orange mess up all these guys? Because a lot of people from Vietnam ended up with PTSD. It's very prevalent, you know, and we know that from all the movies and everything. That's not just, they didn't make it up. There's people really like, why are so many people coming back from this war all messed up, you know? And I think maybe Agent Orange was disrupting the microbiomes. And so when these guys were experiencing all this trauma and whatnot, they couldn't process it properly. But this gets even more interesting because now there's also a mechanism of action for why that might be. And that is, there's a hormone called the corticotropin factor, or corticotropin release factor, or corticotropin release hormone. It's produced in the brain, just like serotonin is produced in the brain, but it's also produced in the gut. And that corticotropin hormone, release hormone, is related to cortisol. And so it modulates how we release cortisol. And so in the gut, the same cells that produce the serotonin also produce this hormone. And we know that the healthy microbiome plays a significant role in proper regulation of those cells. And so if we disrupt the microbiome, not only does when the cells start producing more of the corticotropin factor or the stress hormone, they also start producing less of the serotonin. So it's a complete like imbalance. You know, the serotonin is the feel good hormone. The cortisol is the fight or flight hormone. And then all of a sudden our body's producing way too much cortisol and way too little serotonin. And then we experience these stressful situations like we can experience in life, or like these soldiers experienced in war. And they're so out of whack at the time, they're already got these really elevated levels of cortisol and adrenaline even before they experience the trauma. And so they're already set up in a hypervigilant mode. And then they experience the trauma and then develop, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's the theory.
So for an average person, obviously a soldier at war is a strong example, but for, let's say your average person, someone just here working their job, they're living their life, going to work, maybe being a parent, they have the gut-brain connection that we've referenced a few times now. What are some manifestations that they might see in what they're feeling from like a emotional or mood or focus type of standpoint that might clue them into the fact that they actually have possibly a gut health problem?
Well, yeah, it would just basically, feeling stressed and out of whack. But the ones that are studied really highly, the two, anxiety and depression, or low mood. So anxiety has been shown in many, many studies to be connected to the gut. And they do these studies with autistic children, start to improve the diversity of the gut microbiome in autistic children, and they get a lot lower anxiety. But they can extrapolate that out and show it in the general population. Then also with depression, there's lots of studies that are showing that the gut is related to depression and low mood. There was a study done with mice back in like 2010 that was a pretty well-known study that showed that these mice, when they disrupted the microbiome of the mice, these mice would have a depressed state and they wouldn't try to escape from a water maze. So they would sit there and drown unless they were saved. Then they altered the microbiome of these depressed mice, and the mice became healthy again mentally and went back into basically wanting to live.
That's so interesting. That's a pretty powerful example.
Yeah, but then what they did was they cut the vagus nerve in the mice that had now been healthy, and then they went back to being depressed.
Yeah.
And so what's really interesting about that is that it wasn't just all the change didn't happen in the brain. Obviously, the change was happening in the gut. So all this neurotransmitter is signaling from the gut, and about 70% of the gut-brain axis is signals going from the gut to the brain, and 30% from the brain to the gut. So when they cut that, the brain it was the gut that was signaling to the brain. And so when we talk about intuition and gut feeling and all of these sorts of things, we see that is actual signaling from the second brain that we have back to our central nervous system. And then in 2013, they kind of followed up on that mouse study. Obviously, they didn't cut the vagus nerve of humans, but they also did that, kind of took that same model and applied it to humans in 2013, or at least the paper was released in 2013. and they weren't expecting to see nearly that, that kind of result as they saw in the mice, but it was actually quite significant in what they saw in humans. And this is with depression and changing the gut microbiome. And in fact, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, a huge number of people who have some sort of depressive disorder also have IBS. And they've never really been able to show very well that SSRIs really do anything in the brain to really help with depression. It's a very, probably know that there's lots of studies that have said that it's just not really working. They don't know why it works, but now there's this theory. The reason that they might work for some people is that it's not because of what they're doing in the brain, but because of what they're doing in the gut. So the SSRI, because they know that with some people that take them, it helps them with their IBS. So the serotonin in the gut that regulates digestion and motility in the gut may be being influenced by the SSRIs, which is the healing in the gut that's helping them with their depression, nothing with the SSRI in the brain.
Interesting. So for your company, Good Brew, you have this incredible product. It's probiotic, prebiotic. I want to get into that, but before we get into that, let's just talk about probiotics and prebiotics.
So we're going to think about prebiotics as being the nutrient source for the microbes themselves. So usually prebiotics let's say from the standpoint of how Mother Nature intended it. So there's certain things like resistant starches, soluble fibers, and some other things that the microbes will feed on to then help produce these nutrients that we want them to produce, these metabolites. And with that, we also have a lot of things that we call prebiotics. I mean, you could call anything a prebiotic because if you put it into your system, the microbes are going to eat on it. So the question is what are prebiotics in the positive sense of the word prebiotic, And essentially, these are like what I was saying, the soluble fibers or maybe the resistant starches. So a resistant starch, one that's commonly talked about is like a potato. If you cook a potato, bake a potato, put it in the refrigerator overnight, those starches start to become longer chain starches and produce a really good fuel source for microbes. But of course, you get a lot of calories with that as well. Then there's these fibers that are on the market that are dextrins and synthetic fibers. And yes, they will feed the microbiome, but there is nothing that says that in nature, that's what the good microbiome wants to really feed on. They call them prebiotics, but we hear all of the time people saying, oh yeah, I was using that because my doctor or somebody told me to just go get this, this fiber and it made things so much worse. These are like corn dextrins and wheat dextrins, and they might call them prebiotic. I think that you're starting to see in the industry where they're stepping away from calling those prebiotics and just going back to calling them fibers because they're starting to realize that they might be liable for something because, just because the microbes will feed on something doesn't mean that you're getting the result from that you want. So the prebiotic is what the microbes feed on, and the probiotic, pro meaning good or life, they're the good bacteria that live in our gut. And of course then we have the pathogens, and then we have a lot of microbes in the gut that if they're in balance, they may at times, like E. coli actually does an important job for the gut, and most people have some E. coli, and it can there's many strains of E. coli again, but you don't want to go taking E. coli. The problem is we get too much of it, we get infected by it, and it becomes a big problem, right? So it's a lot of it's about balance. But the ones, the probiotics that you most commonly will hear about that are colonizing probiotics, that's like lactobacillus, and there's many strains of these, and bifidobacteria and Akkermansia, and some Reuteri, a lot of people, Reuteri, a lot of people really hear a lot about that. That's a well studied. But these colonizing probiotics, I guess what I was talking about just there, come from our mothers. When we're born, we inherit them from our mothers. Yeah, and also during breastfeeding, there's actually a process that goes on where there's signaling. This is how important these microbes are to us. There's a signaling that goes on in the mother that tells the body to start sending some of these microbes up from the digestive tract into the breast milk and until so yes, they're extremely important, and And what we have with those colonizing bacteria is something that's hard to replenish um, once we have it. So when we take probiotics that say are sold on a shelf in a capsule, they typically don't survive very well on the shelf, and they don't survive through the stomach acid. So you hear of some people like culturing their own probiotics by making yogurt. So you can go to the store, you can buy one of these strains of probiotic that doesn't survive very well on the shelf or in your stomach, but you could start making a yogurt with it and culturing that and multiplying it out so that you get a lot more of it
Wow.
in the yogurt. So whatever's in the capsule, you can make a yogurt with that and then get a lot more of it because you're getting it to to multiply in the yogurt that you're making, and that might help you get more of it through ingesting it as food. And then you see a lot of products that are on the market that in theory should have probiotics in them, but they've been pasteurized. When they study these yogurts, very few of them really have any significant amount of probiotic in them because they've been pasteurized. And so unless you're making your own yogurt and eating it every day, it may not really be doing what you think it's doing. The same thing with like kombucha, right? So if you make your own kombucha, you could get a lot of diverse bacteria from that. But most of the kombucha that's now sold on the store shelves, because they were mandated to stop the fermentation process because it made alcohol. Basically what they do is they pasteurize the kombucha and then they add back in a probiotic to that kombucha that's on the shelf in the store, unless you're getting some sort of homebrew stuff,
Yeah.
Which is okay, but it's not exactly what people think they're getting, right? I mean, it's so then there's these spore forming probiotics that are found in nature, and this is a beautiful thing. Like Mother Nature has, provided for us is that when we go and eat food from the soil and from these sorts of things and some fermented foods, we get also what's called spore forming probiotics, and they are probiotics that are in a form that survive out into the nature well. They'll survive on the shelf, and more importantly, they survive through your stomach and the stomach acid. And these good spore forming probiotics, they're transitory, they're not colonizing. But then when they go through the digestive system, they bloom in the intestine where they're supposed to, and they start to produce the metabolites in the environment that are other colonizing bacteria like to also live in. And so they help produce the environment for homeostasis that then gives like a boost to our colonizing microbes, the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria and those sorts of things. And so with Good Brew in our product, we created a product that's very simple. It has a spore-forming probiotic, Bacillus coagulans. It survives very well. It can survive if you're a coffee drinker. It's well studied. It'll survive the heat of the coffee just fine because it's in a spore, just like why it survives out in the sunlight and out, in various climates, but more importantly, while it survives through the stomach and the stomach acid, in combination with the organic prebiotic fiber. So our fiber is the inulin fiber that is organic and comes from a agave plant. And this is the kind of fiber that our gut microbiome has really evolved to feed on. So that combination of the Bacillus coagulans and this prebiotic fiber makes its way through the stomach and gets to the lower intestines, where it starts to help feed and create an environment that will start to help you shift into homeostasis if you're in dysbiosis, or help you maintain the good microbes that you have and can give a boost to all of that. And that's where all the production of the short chain fatty acids, et cetera. But that strain of probiotic that we use, Bacillus coagulans, in addition to helping to create an environment to support these other positive probiotics, has also been well studied in and of itself to really help support immune function. It's 25 clinical studies behind it, 40 plus papers on this specific strain. Now there's many, many more papers written on Bacillus coagulans in general, helping to improve oral health and many other things. But this strain specifically has been shown to really help increase digestive function, immune function, and protein utilization up to 20%. So as we eat our food, we eat a nice steak or whatever, and it starts to work its way through the body. It gets into the stomach. If the stomach's healthy, it starts to get digested in the stomach and broken down. Then it gets into the small intestine, where there's some enzymes that help to break down those proteins. But our bodies do not, or is not meant to absorb whole proteins. Those proteins need to be broken down into peptides and amino acids, and the microbiome plays a very important role in that function. And so, if you have a microbiome that's in dysbiosis, it won't properly break down. Can't properly break down proteins. So whether you're an athlete, whether you're on a carnivore diet, whether you're an older person or whatever, it's very important that we get these peptides and amino acids that are broken down into a form that is ready to be utilized by the body.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that is connected to inflammation, is when we're not breaking down those proteins properly. So if people know the lymphatic system, all the fats and lipids that we ingest, they end up going through the lymphatic system, which go initially around, they don't go initially into the bloodstream and through the liver. They go outside of the digestive tract into the lymphatic system, get pushed up through the heart, and then the heart pushes that down to the liver. And so what happens when we're not properly digesting these proteins is some of these proteins go out with the fats into the lymphatic system, and the body does not like to see proteins. That's a very big warning signal to the immune system. And so we start to produce all these antigens. And the more of that happens, the higher, the more of these antigens that we produce. And so now we're attacking all of these foreign proteins and creating all of this inflammation. So that process of both utilizing and breaking down these proteins for just basically for like better muscle recovery or all the other functions that proteins do in the body that are related to immune function and organ function and brain function. But it's also very important to keep those proteins broken down so that they don't go out into the lymphatic system and create an inflammatory cascade.
And Gabe, so there's a lot of prebiotic and probiotic supplements out there. You've already kind of touched on, particularly with the probiotics, why some of them may be inferior, or you may just not be getting what you think you're getting from it. So with Good Brew specifically, tell me, why is that superior than just picking up something off the shelf from like your nutrition or grocery store?
Right. So the biggest thing with Good Brew is that it survives, is well known to survive, and it supports these other probiotics that are colonizing in the gut. But in addition to that, because we use it as a scoop rather than in a capsule, you can get a significant amount of prebiotic fiber in that scoop. If you try to get a capsule that also says it has a prebiotic, the capsule itself does not contain enough fiber. The capsule doesn't have enough volume in the capsule to contain enough fiber to really be significant. So by having it in a scoop form, not only are you getting a probiotic that survives through the stomach and will support these other probiotics, and if you are taking some other probiotic, it's only going to work synergistically with that. They're not competing in that way. I mean, Good Brew will help you get more from any other probiotic that you're taking as well. But by doing it as a scoop with a probiotic that survives, you have what's called a symbiotic relationship, and that probiotic survives. It feeds on that soluble fiber, produces the short chain fatty acids, the other metabolites that then support the rest of your digestive function and your other microbes in a way that you can manage yourself. So we always tell people to start small with Good Brew, just take like one scoop. And a lot of our customers only use one scoop. And these are even people that have digestive health issues we get all kinds of testimonials, especially with acid reflux and chronic constipation. A lot of people who've spent years trying to deal with those issues have found that Good Brew has helped them tremendously with either of those issues and other ones as well. But there's two we just hear a lot about. So by you being able to use it as a scoop, you actually get a significant amount of prebiotic fiber. It's organic prebiotic fiber. It's not a dextrin. It's not a synthetic fiber. It's not something where you have to worry about the pesticides in it or anything like that. So you can get a significant amount of prebiotic fiber in combination with a probiotic that works, supports the other microbes that you already have. So we want to make the best thing we can do is make the most use of the colonizing microbes that we already have. And if they've been sequestered by bad bugs, you have to do something to help boost them back up. So Good Brew comes in as like a support team for the rest of the digestive system. And I'll tell you a little bit about kind of how that works from the stomach down to the lower intestine. The stomach produces its own acid obviously, and it's the most acidic part of the digestive system. And when people have acid reflux or something along those lines, and they say, "Oh, I ate something that was acidic and it made my stomach hurt," that's really not the proper way to think about it, because there's nothing that we eat that's more acidic than what our stomach already is. The problem is that the lining of the stomach gets damaged and it can't get repaired. And so when we eat something that then starts to cause a lot of acid production in the stomach, it's getting past the mucosal lining that's supposed to be there, the barrier that's supposed to be there, and it's getting to the flesh of the stomach, and that's what's causing the pain and the inflammation. And that's very hard to reverse. And all they do in the medical community is offer people proton pump inhibitors and antacids, and then eventually surgeries. None of those things are really curing the problem. So we have seen a lot of people tell us that it helps them with something immediate with their acid reflux, but then longer term, it seems to over time really help them to reduce and even not experience it anymore. And there's some good research that's showing that these Bacillus coagulans help to displace H. pylori, which might be a part of why that's happening. So anyhow, but then as you get into the small intestine is supposed to be, at a healthy small intestine, is back to more of a neutral pH. And then the lower intestine is supposed to be not as acidic as the stomach, but a healthy lower intestine is on this acidic side. But that acidity in the lower intestine is not produced by the body, it's produced by the microbiome. And so when we have a healthy microbiome, lactobacillus especially plays a major role in producing that acidic environment. The lactobacillus, it produces a lactic acid that a healthy lower intestine should be around like a 5.5 pH. And when we have the pathogenic bacteria taking over, it raises the pH, and it makes it very hard for these other positive microbes, the probiotics, to come back up, to proliferate. They're sequestered. They're there, but they're not getting much benefit from them. You're not getting the short chain fatty acid production, the protein breakdown, and all of these other things that the microbiome does there. And so Bacillus coagulans goes through, and it, in combination with the fiber, and it produces also lactic acid that now starts to get that pH level back to where it's supposed to be in the lower intestine, to really help boost the environment for all these other good microbes that are there. So that's kind of how it works. Stomach very acidic, small intestine should be kind of neutral, and then the lower intestine should be somewhat acidic, but that is managed by the microbiome itself. We also know that has a lot to do with managing the like candida and that sort of thing. So it's well known that lactobacillus plays a big role in helping to manage that. And we all have some sort of fungus in our body, and people can have a candida infection that actually gets outside of the digestive system, and it's a very extreme condition that causes inflammation all through the body.
Cool. I would love to give you some rapid fire questions here. So kind of
okay.
First thing that comes to mind, aside from taking Good Brew, what is one thing someone can start doing today to improve their gut health?
Probably lowering sugar. That's like everything comes back to too much sugar in our modern diet, and sugar really disrupts the gut microbiome. There's other things too that you could be, like, if you drink too much and those sorts of things. But yeah, for everybody out there, almost every American, too much sugar. What
is one habit that you wish people would stop doing as relates to their gut health? And don't say eating too much sugar. We got that one covered already.
Right. One habit. It might be not getting enough fiber. I think people don't understand that, and there's a big movement towards high protein diet, but you can't break down those proteins properly if you're not getting some fiber with that. Yeah.
Perfect. I love that one. Is there something a person can integrate into their morning wake up routine or their evening wind down routine to support their gut health?
Outside of using Good Brew?
Yeah.
I would say, well, I'm going to be a little bit out there on the metaphysical. Our breath work has a lot to do with all kinds of function in our body, moving exercising the lymph nodes and moving toxins and those sorts of things. I think if you can lower stress, there's this relationship that goes stress and microbiome. It goes both ways. I think it's improving in our modern world, but I don't think people really realize the power of breathing. That's something. And that's something with that. The lungs are an extension of the digestive system. People don't really think about it. It's all about like processing nutrients. The lungs branch out from the same neural tube that is very early period of life there, and the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, and the digestive system. But from the digestive neural or tube comes the lungs and the kidneys and all of these internal organs. So if you think about it, the lungs are actually processing nutrient, other things other than just oxygen through the lungs as well. But
Yeah.
so yeah, breathing, I would say, work on that. Understand that that's actually very important. It's way more important than a lot of people realize. It's not some woo-woo stuff.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And
Yeah.
as you know, I do private coaching with folks, and I am very intentional about building morning and evening routines, which is why I asked around creating sort of symbiosis with all of their physiological systems. And a big part of it is doing things like breath work and just having gratitude and affirmations and things like that to do all that self-regulation.
Yeah, gratitude is so critical. And and give yourself a little bit of time between when you eat your meal and when you go to bed too.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, last one. What is one myth about gut health that you wish would disappear forever?
That it's a tertiary to our health rather than
Yes.
synergistic to our health. But it's core to our health. It's not an outside thing. It's not like, oh no, it's as important as any. The gut microbiome is essential to our physiology and our mental health. It's very, very, very central.
100%. And that's why we're here talking today. Cool. So folks can find your product at goodbrew.com. And also, everyone, I will, of course, link to Gabe, to Good Brew, to their social at the Superhuman Blueprint Podcast.com. Gabe, it has been a pleasure speaking with you today. I appreciate all of the knowledge and information. I know a heck of a lot more now about what is happening in my body and how that impacts everything going on than I did at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Drew. I really appreciate it. Remember, brew is spelled BRU, and we may still have some specials depending on. We'll always usually have some special. If this, depending on when we post here, we might still be able to get the Christmas specials or the New Year specials.
Perfect. Excellent. Yep, that's good. GOODBRU.com. Gabe, take care.
Yeah, take care, Drew. Nice speaking with you.
You too.